If you are both lifting weights and doing cardio, there is a chance that your program is not quite optimal. And it's not because combining them is a bad idea, but because most programs make these 5 structural mistakes that create unnecessary interference between the two. So today I'm going to walk you through all 5 using a hybrid program that we just built for Physique University as the example of what it looks like when you get these right. Welcome to Wits and Weights, the show that puts a popular piece of fitness advice under the microscope, finds the hidden reason it doesn't work, and gives you the deceptively simple fix that does. I'm your host, Philip Pape, and if you caught our last few episodes, you know that we've been on a little bit of a theme. We talked about whether your fitness goals are in conflict with each other and covered how to combine strength training and endurance without killing your gains. And that came from some listener questions, Richard, Gerwin, a few others who wanted to know how to do both together. Today, I'm getting a little more specific. Instead of whether you can combine lifting and cardio, we are looking at why most people who try to do these oftentimes don't get it quite right or suboptimally, or they get frustrated because it's not working for them, and then they get no results from either one. And it usually comes down to 5 programming mistakes. And you know, we're all about teaching you how to adjust your own programming and your nutrition. And that's what we're going to do today. So to make this really concrete, I love stories, I love examples. So I'm going to use a hybrid program that we just built for Physique University. It's called Velocity, and it's a 5-day program. We're going to use the principles from that program to walk you through these 5 mistakes so you can avoid them yourself, whether you jump in and use it or you're creating your own program or evaluating someone else's program. If you want the full program, it is available inside Physique University. Go to witsandweights.com/physique. I'll tell you more about that later. But for now, I'm going to show you the thinking behind it so you can spot these mistakes for yourself. And then stick around to the end because I'm going to give you a 60-second audit that you can run on your current program to find out if your conditioning work is incorporated with your strength training in the right way. So here's what we're going to cover. First, the 5 mistakes and why each one creates interference between your lifting and your cardio. Second, what the fix looks like in a real program structure. And third, how to evaluate your own setup without having to overhaul everything. All right, let me paint you a picture of what most people's combined training looks like. I've looked at a lot of people's programs, or they've suggested, hey, can I do this? Can I do that? And they might have a lifting program, a training program that's push-pull leg split or an upper-lower split. And then they have goals for cardio. It could be conditioning for a sport, even with some teenagers I've worked with who are in baseball or basketball or football. It could be cardiovascular health. It could be for fat loss. And so they kind of fill in the gaps. Okay, they start with lifting, which I'm a big fan of prioritizing your lifting, but then they kind of try to fill in the gaps randomly. They run on their off days, or they tack a 30-minute jog or a sprint or whatever onto the end of leg day, and maybe they do HIIT classes or boot camp classes or whatever whenever they feel like it, and kind of just throw it in there. And on paper, it seems reasonable, right? You're training both systems and you've got a schedule for your lifting, and then somehow you're getting your cardio in there. But the problem is that the approaches most people have are splitting up the recovery buckets, and they're not thinking of it as a system. In other words, they have one for strength and one for cardio, and they're not thinking about the interplay between them, kind of the long tail between them, because that's a little bit more complex. Or at least it seems complex, but we're going to simplify it for you. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between Tuesday and Wednesday, right? You have one recovery pool, one capacity pool. And when you drain the pool on, for example, a hard run the day before a heavy squat session, well, your squat session is going to suffer. And it's not because cardio causes interference, but because of the interaction between the two, the way you set it up is actually causing the interference. And that's the interference effect we talked about in episode 443, which there was a study that looked at thousands of athletes that saw that the actual muscle building interference from concurrent training, okay, we're going to use the term hybrid or concurrent training to mean both lifting and cardio, that the interference actually is close to 0 when you set up your variables correctly, which is pretty cool. So we've actually studied this and said, you know what, the interference effect really isn't much of a big deal when you set up your whole training program for the week up correctly. So let's go through those 5 mistakes. And if you avoid these, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. Mistake number 1, doing conditioning before your heavy lifts. So if you run, if you bike, if you do even like a conditioning circuit before your heavy compound lifts, right? That's before your squat, your deadlift, your pressing, even variants of those lifts, like, strong lifts that require a good amount of energy and glycogen and everything else. If you do that, your force production on those lifts is going to drop. And we've seen that it could drop by 10 to 15% if you do a hard cardio session right before that. And that's a big number. That's not a small number. I mean, that's the difference between I'm going to hit a new PR or I'm going to grind through what I barely got last time, right? So if you're trying to increase your weight, your heaviest work, especially the barbell work, the compound lifts, things like that, need to come first in the session when you have a fresh nervous system, when your glycogen stores are full, when you're mentally ready to go too, because there's a little bit of a safety aspect we got to watch out for when we're fatigued. And so in our velocity training template, every lower body day opens with a barbell compound. It's either squat or deadlift. We do a 3 set of 5 in there. It's a pretty cool program actually, because it's a hybrid. It's actually a combo of heavy lifts, more like bodybuilding work, finishers, and cardio. It's pretty cool how we put it together. Coach Carol helped come up with the overall structure. I mean, she did most of the work. I'm going to give her credit for that. So Carol, if you're listening, all you get the credit, and that's why we love her. So when you look at the lower body day, it starts with the compound lift. Every upper body day opens with bench or overhead. Again, 3 sets of 5. And then there's actually a 5th day in there because this is a 5-day program. The 5th day is more of a true endurance conditioning core type of day. So those are your highest priority movements. Everything else follows after. So that's mistake number 1, is doing your cardio first before you lift. Mistake number 2 is, I'll say, random pairings of usually supersets that we're doing, but even if they're not supersets, random pairings that fatigue the wrong things. So if you, for example, pair exercises that compete for the same stabilizers or grip strength that you need for your main lifts, you could be degrading performance across the session. And what I mean by this is you would rather pair movements that target different muscle groups or antagonist muscle groups, but different or antagonist, either one. Like antagonist would be biceps and triceps. Different would be just completely different parts of your body. And that way one can recover while you do the other in the finish, or in the, the superset. So in velocity, after the main compound, you're going to see multiple superset pairings because we're trying to save you time in the gym so that you could fit in this cardio work, but also have a decent amount of, recovery and time. I just said time 3 times. You're going to see things like split squats paired with lying leg curls, or incline bench paired with cable rows, right? Opposite or non-competing patterns. And that lets you get a decent amount of volume while saving time. So that's really all we're trying to do, is get the volume in while saving time. But if you're trying to pair things up randomly, you may over fatigue things that then don't allow you to perform in the rest of the set, or that end up taking longer, if that all makes sense. Okay, so that's mistake number 2. Mistake number 3 is putting high intensity intervals on the wrong days of the week. And this is where it gets tricky with hybrid programs, because they might put like hit work or sprint work or something like that on a separate day, like an off day, until you realize that those also create some significant nervous system and metabolic fatigue, and that could carry over into the next day. So then it gets a little tricky, right? If you do a tough sprint session on Wednesday and then you try to deadlift on Thursday, that could give you a little bit more fatigue than you want going into Thursday. And we had Steph Mager on the show. She's an elite powerlifter, and she talks about spacing apart where you hit your nervous system, and you have to be really smart about it. So in our program in Velocity, the sprint intervals appear on upper body days. That's really the key variable here, instead of the lower body days, because then after your upper body lifting and your supersets, you could do, let's say, your sprinting protocol, either flat ground sprinting or on a bike, rower, elliptical, something like that. And we've talked about this protocol before that I originally stole from Brad Kearns. 10 to 20 seconds all out, 6-to-1 rest to work ratio, 4 to 8 sets. So about 10 to 20 minutes total. So when you do that right on your upper body days, your legs are getting this relative break because you're doing the upper body. So the sprints are fresh for your legs. And then the sprint intervals are short enough that they help you develop that anaerobic power, but they don't create so much stress that it carries over to the next lower body day, if that makes sense. So that's why we do lower, upper, the cardio, kind of pure cardio day, and then lower, upper. So you kind of get your upper before you get some rest from your legs instead of before your big leg days, if that makes sense. So again, the sequencing can really matter with a hybrid program. Mistake number 4 is skipping dedicated recovery days or smashing in more training into those days. Guys, I know you love to go to the gym 7 days a week, or you like to work out. Stop doing that. Okay. Zone 2 work, for example, which is kind of that low intensity cardio where you can hold a conversation barely. I mean, it's tough. It's not like an easy breeze, but it's also not HIIT or super intense cardio. I would say it's kind of an underused tool. I don't talk about it a lot because I don't usually train with the zones in mind. But when you're trying to add in some steady state cardio, it can be a helpful metric where if you're not using the metric, you run the risk of just super easy cardio, which isn't getting you to the stress and even the calorie burn that you're trying to get, or you run the risk of going too hard and overstressing yourself, right? So in our program Velocity, the zone 2 shows up as, for example, we throw in incline walking after certain lifting sessions for like 20 to 30 minutes. And we give you the option. We say, look, you can incline walk, you can throw in a rucksack, you can go faster. The point is to progress in one of those variables over time, make it more difficult or make it faster. And even though it's not there to burn calories, it will. It's really there to promote blood flow. It aids recovery. It builds your aerobic base, your work capacity, but really without adding meaningful fatigue on top of the lifting fatigue and the stress, right? Because the aerobic system, right, the oxygen using system is what fuels your recovery between heavy sets. So if you have a better cardio base, then the faster you recover between sets and between sessions and between training weeks, which, by the way, is also why we have all these finishers and supersets in here. The whole thing is geared toward improving your cardiovascular fitness and conditioning, but in a really cool, structured, balanced way that lifters tend to enjoy, right? That lifters tend to enjoy as opposed to, say, CrossFitters. So when you look at day 3 of our 5 days, it's dedicated entirely to that zone 2 type movement, to some ab work. We actually have some really good loaded ab work in kind of a superset fashion to get it done quickly, and a little bit of mobility, which to me is just kind of stretching and limbering up. It's nothing special, but if you have specific mobility protocols or yoga or whatever you like, go for it and put it in there. I personally, I have the shoulder where I had surgery. So doing some stretching for that is helpful. There's actually no heavy lifting. There's no sprinting, but it's also not a rest day. It's more like what you would call active recovery. And there's a difference between all of that, right? Rest is doing nothing, which has its place for sure. In fact, it's a 5-day program. So the idea is you have 2 days off. It doesn't have to be Saturday, Sunday. You have flexibility, and that's another variable that you can choose on your own that makes sense based on your work schedule, your sleep needs, your fueling, right? How you recover from one to the next. You can kind of mix it up a little bit. You can even stretch it out if you have to. Like if you're a little on the older side and you can't handle all that work, you can always stretch it out. But recovery is doing the things that actively help your body repair and adapt, and that's where that day in the middle is kind of like, we're going to keep you moving forward and staying conditioned, stay active. We're going to give you structure and something to do, but it's not going to be slamming your fatigue level up further from another really, really heavy, hard session. And so that's kind of the stuff that a lot of lifters will skip, which is why we program it in. And one of my themes lately with a lot of personal clients, one-on-one clients, has been, let's program in some of your conditioning and cardio, because you're not going to do it otherwise, even if it's just walks. So this can really be helpful to limber up, to work on those joints. And then mistake number 5 is treating every conditioning session as mandatory regardless of how you feel. As I was coming up with 5 mistakes, I was wondering which one really floats up high here. And I would say this one is super powerful. So our program, again, Velocity, it has finishers at the end of lower body days. So this is like a 4 to 5 minute prescribed block of your dealer's choice, sled or prowler pushes, they're called, kettlebell swings, farmer's carries, things like that, just for a little bit of conditioning. They're light. The program says, hey, these are optional. You can skip them if the energy's low, add them if you're well recovered. If you're, trying to add a little bit more of the conditioning volume, a little bit of extra calorie burn as long as you can do them. And I love programs that have that kind of flexibility built in. And it might be the most important mistake to avoid because your recovery capacity is going to change week to week, especially if you're like in fat loss or you have a high sleep stress situation or you're lacking on sleep or you're not fueling enough for nutrition, whether it's on purpose or not. And also accumulated training load, right? You start to build up fatigue over weeks and weeks doing a program. And a program that doesn't account for that's not a smart program, right? And that doesn't always mean deloads, by the way, right? The way I do this program, it doesn't even have a deload. You can program them in if you want, but it's just really a schedule, right? It's a schedule that's smart, that balances your training, your conditioning, your finishers, all of that stuff. So the mindset where you're always pushing and never adapting is the problem when it comes to this mistake. Treating like these full-on sessions is exactly what you have to do all the time. You have to have a little bit of auto-regulation or optionality already built in so that you don't feel like, oh, I failed or because I didn't do that, right? I'd rather have extra things that are optional than too many things that you have to cut out randomly and then you feel like you're not doing enough or doing what you're supposed to do. Now, I just said that your recovery capacity changes week to week based on your sleep, your stress, and your nutrition. And we do spend a lot of time talking about training and nutrition, but sleep is the one people I say most underinvest in, and it's the one that controls everything else. And I'm a huge fan of one company in particular. They sponsor this show. They're called Cozy Earth. And I have several of their products. One of those are pajamas. I never wore pajamas before. I thought they were pointless. They were always too hot, uncomfortable. And then I tried their bamboo-derived pajamas, and I wear them now. I wear them now because they are lightweight, they're cool, they don't make me overheat, and I feel like I'm recovering and relaxing. And it's great to just have something luxurious to relax in. And then another luxurious thing that I've been using of theirs lately is the cuddle blanket. They call it the classic cuddle blanket. And it is super, super, super thick. My kids love it. It's super soft. Feels like they're hamsters or even softer than that. We throw it on the couch. It's big enough to share, right? You can use it just for yourself and kind of really cuddle in and get warm, or you can share it with somebody else. And again, another good way to relax. So I like little elements of luxury in the home. If you want to splurge, if you want to buy a gift for someone, I think it's great. Go to witsandweights.com/CozyEarth. Really good company. I'm into very stand-up companies who back their stuff up. Cozy Earth has a 100-night sleep trial. They have a 10-year warranty, so you don't have to stress about it. If it doesn't work, you can return it. No harm, no foul. Just get comfortable. Work on that recovery. Work on that sleep. This is one way to do it. Support the podcast by checking out witsandweights.com/CozyEarth. The code will show up. It's Wits and Weights for 20% off. It'll show up when you go to the website. Go to witsandweights.com/CozyEarth and just take care of yourself, guys. All right. So now you've seen the 5 mistakes. I'm going to zoom out and show you what it looks like when you fix all 5 and everything clicks together. What does that look like? All right. So I mentioned our program Velocity. It runs 5 days. Days 1 and 4 are lower body. They open with a barbell compound lift. So you've got squats and deads. Then you have a couple superset blocks for accessory work, the optional finisher that I mentioned, and then some zone 2 work like incline walking or however you want to make the walking harder. And again, that's a good way to structure in your walking. So that's days 1 and 4. We have a couple upper bodies in there as well, days 2 and 5. Same logic, heavy compound first. So you've got bench and overhead. And by the way, you could always have variations on these. So whether it's a close grip or maybe an incline shoulder press or whatever. And then 2 superset blocks and then sprint intervals on those days. And then day 3 in the middle is your active recovery and movement day, where we throw in some of the zone 2, some of the loaded ab work, and then some mobility in there. And if you think of the rhythm, heavy lower, heavy upper, recovery, heavy lower, heavy upper, it's a logical sequence where you never have 2 lower body days back to back. You never do sprints the day before squats or deadlifts. So it's intentional. And that's what I mean when I say programming is about the relationships between training stimuli. It's not just the stimuli themselves. And I like the word stimuli. Every individual session in Velocity is fine on its own. That's fine. But what makes a system is how each day sets up the next day and accumulated fatigue and stress and adaptations. So the upper body day creates relative lower body recovery while still training your anaerobic system, your work capacity through the sprinting. The recovery day sits in the middle. So you sit the second half of the week or you hit the second half of the week as freshly as the first. It's almost like 2 mini weeks within a week. So you're always recovering in between. And then that zone 2 walking after lifting doubles as active recovery that, let's be honest, you're not going to do otherwise if I don't tell you to do it. So that's why it's in there. If you look at your own training week right now, how you're training, if you're assuming you're trying to get in conditioning, work capacity, cardio, things like that, regardless, if it doesn't have intentional sequencing, that's probably your biggest ROI. That's probably where the biggest gains are hiding in your program. And just because you got a program from a coach or an app or whatever doesn't mean it's optimized for those things. A lot of programs are not structured very well, and you can just rearrange it to make it work better for you. All right, before we wrap up, I promised you a 60-second program audit that you can do right now on your own training setup. I'm going to share that in just a moment. But if this episode has you looking at your training week differently, then I want to just remind you that there is a ready-made turnkey program in Physique University called Velocity. It's one of our 10+ training templates we've got for you that are super flexible. They cover a lot of different scenarios. And Velocity specifically is a 5-day hybrid template built from the ground up, and it avoids every one of the mistakes we covered today. I'm not going to go through it again because we just went through the structure a couple times, but Velocity is one of over 10 customizable templates we have. Whether you train 3, 4, or 5 days a week, whether you have a full gym or a garage setup or you're traveling, every template can be adjusted for the equipment and preferences using a built-in substitution lookup that we have. Also, every one of our programs is in Boost Camp. So if you want to use an app, once you're in, you can go in, click the link, import it, and immediately run it in the app. I've set them all up in the app for you, including Velocity. And then there's, of course, a library of lessons, short modules on everything from how to breathe and brace under a barbell, what rest periods to use for different goals, what equipment to put in your gym bag. Like, there's so many things. If you want to go deeper on the cardio side, we also have something called the Adaptive Cardio Workshop in there. The replay, the guide are in there. In other words, there's plenty of resources to learn from and then apply with our help in Physique University. And you get access to me and Coach Carol for questions, yes, from real human beings who we can help with your programming. We can do form checks, all of that. Just go to witsandweights.com/physique. That's witsandweights.com/physique. All right, here's a quick way to tell if your current program is set up for hybrid training correctly or it's working against yourself, all right? I want you to answer 3 questions. Look at your program and answer 3 questions. Question 1, do your heaviest compound lifts come first in every session? If not, your strength work is probably at a little bit of a disadvantage. Number 2, are your high-intensity conditioning sessions, maybe that's sprints, HIIT, whatever you do, are they separated from your heavy lower body days by at least 24 hours? So like if you're sprinting the day before heavy squats or deadlifts, that could be an issue. Could be an issue for you. Number 3, do you have at least 1 day per week that's dedicated to low intensity recovery work? All right. And this is more of the active recovery. And this is mainly just for you guys who are not walking enough or you're not moving enough to think of this as training. I don't care if it's zone 2 or mobility or core work. I don't care. None of that. It's just having something in there that you're doing to get you moving, right? And that can really help with the blood flow and the recovery in the joints and all of that other stuff to kind of keep your overall week fairly active while you still have a couple true rest days in there. So if you said no to any of those 3 questions, then you just have to rearrange the program you already have. You don't necessarily need a new one. Just go through this episode, listen to the mistakes and the tips that I gave you, and try to rearrange it. Or jump into Physique University, witsandweights.com/physique, and we'll help you do that. Until next time, keep using your wits, lifting those weights, and remember, sometimes the biggest gains come from rearranging your current training plan, not adding more. I'm Philip Pape, and I'll talk to you next time here on the Wits and Weights podcast.